This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, welcome to episode 9 of A Geek Leader. Today I want to talk about creative rhythms. As a leader, we are responsible for being creative. We have to come up with creative ideas on a regular basis. We have to come up with creative solutions to problems. We have to basically be brilliant at a moment's notice. So one thing that comes about when people talk about creativity, there's always this background thought, and I used to think it too, that creativity just comes. It comes, when you're in the shower. It comes just whenever. And you can't plan for creativity, and you can't just make it happen. But what I found is there's actually a rhythm to creativity. And I read this book called The Accidental Creative, and it's actually required reading for my class that I teach at the local university when I'm teaching a business of web design class. But we make them go through this book called The Accidental Creative to learn about the 5 elements of creative rhythm that the author Todd Henry talks about. And I wanted to go through these 5 elements and hopefully share some knowledge that I take when I'm talking about leadership, when I'm portraying creativity when it comes to being a leader. The first element is focus. And we all know that focus is one of those things that you have to try at. You have to look into, you have to continuously practice focus. Okay, one thing about all 5 of these elements, and we all know with focus, is that they're finite. They're things that run out. We don't have an unlimited supply of focus, right? Anybody that has kids knows that when your kids run around screaming, you can't just focus on them as well as focus on the conference call that you're taking or whatever. Your focus is very limited. So you need to be very careful with your focus. It is renewable, but it's a limited resource. You have a finite amount of focus at any given time. So in this book, they talk about how can you cluster things together? How can you take multiple tasks or multiple projects and kind of work them near each other so that your focus doesn't have to completely shift from one thing to another, but it can kind of you have some synergy between those 2 different areas, right? When you're focusing on one thing that's similar to another thing, the shift is a little bit quicker, it's a little bit easier, and you lose so much focus trying to turn it off and turn it back on. Another thing that was in this book that I found really helpful was the idea of the big 3. Come up with 3 things that you're going to focus on as your most important things. They're not necessarily your biggest things. They're not necessarily the longest activities that you're going to be working on. A lot of times what I do at night is I'll look at my phone and I'll pull up the reminders app on the iPhone, and I'll have a reminder list called today. And what I'll do is I'll just put 3 things that I want to accomplish tomorrow. And that's kind of like my big 3. And they're just 3 to-dos that I need to be thinking about. Now, the big 3 they talk about in the book are really more long-term things, more long-term projects that need creativity and creative energy associated with them. But for me, it's more like, what am I going to focus on in the moment? And that's focus. So that's one of the 5 creative elements. The next one is relationships. And again, we have a finite amount of relationships. In the book Tribes, they talk about that people can only maintain strong relationships with about 250 people. And once it gets over that number, the relationships really aren't very strong anymore. So with relationships, there's different things that you can do to kind of make sure you're having the right relationships and you're not neglecting those relationships. There's this idea of masterminds, or in this book they call them circles, and it's groups of people that they're like-minded. They're kind of in the same boat, whether they're in the same career, they are in the same level at the same time, and they can kind of play off each other. So it's just a small group of people with same ambitions that you can hold each other accountable. So in your mastermind, you may want to go around and ask, what are you working on now? What did you accomplish since our last meeting? What can we help you with? What challenges do you have? Those are kind of some of the things that you can talk about in those mastermind groups. Another thing about relationships is Jim Rohn says that we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. And I think that's really important. If you look at your friends and look at who you associate, who you spend the most time with, is that who you want to be? If not, then you need to maybe up the ante a little bit. Find some more people to spend time with. I'm not saying, get rid of all your friends that you have today, but just be selective about the time that you spend. Another thing with relationships, and it's important if you're a leader of a team, maybe a manager, is to talk about head-to-heads, talk about one-on-ones with your team. And one-on-ones are extremely important. And I've already talked a little bit about having that difficult conversation with those people if you need to, but it's also good in a one-on-one to ask questions like, what can you do better? And every time I have a one-on-one, that's where it ends. Give me something that I can do better. I want to leave this meeting with some positive feedback that I can either take action on, or some negative feedback that I can take action on. I want to know, what am I doing that I should continue doing, and what am I doing that you don't like? Another thing is having a core team, having a team that you can rely on, you can be accountable to, as well as you can get information from them, and you can get true and honest feedback from them. And it's really important when it's coming to career advice that core team is not in your company, because they may not have your best career interest at heart. So you need someone that can say, hey, it's time for you to step up and move. It's time for you to go somewhere else and take the responsibility to lead somewhere else. And that's where a core team can be really helpful. Next up is energy. Energy is really important when it comes to the creative rhythm, and we all know we have a finite amount of energy, especially if you stayed up late to work on a project or had a release going on or something bad going on where you had an outage and you had to work really late. And you know that you can get a little bit more energy from coffee or Red Bull, but that's not real sustainable energy. And several studies show that when you lose sleep and lose energy, you start making poor decisions. So some of the things you can do to improve your energy is to just prune things out. I know that sounds harsh and it sounds like you're cutting things out of your life, but you really are, and you really need to do that. At our old house, we had this grapevine that was going across our arbor. And every year we had to prune it. We had to cut it down, cut down large branches of it, large pieces, just so that the more mature branches that were there would bear fruit and they would grow grapes. Now, unfortunately, we had birds that came and ate all the grapes, so we never really got to enjoy them. But that's how grapevines work. If you're at a vineyard, the keeper of the vineyard will cut the new growths so that the more mature ones can get that nutrients and they can get the energy and grow and produce fruit, because the new ones aren't ready to produce fruit. All they're going to do is suck the energy out of the plant. And a lot of times we're like that with our ideas. We're working on something that's bearing fruit right now, that's showing progress. It's getting ready to bear fruit maybe. And then we have these thoughts and these direction changes, these pivots that come up. And we want to spend a little bit of time on that, but not too much. But then we have another one that comes up, and we'll spend a little bit of time on that, but not too much. And what we're doing is we're pulling our energy away from the thing, the project, the task that's going to bear fruit, and we're diversifying it to things that aren't going to bear fruit. And that's really bad, because we're losing that energy. We can't get it back. It's a finite resource. Another thing you can do to help with your energy is to create stopping points. And what I like with my friend Adam came up with the idea of stopping points. I got to give him full credit. But one of the things about stopping points is you give yourself deadlines, tight, fictitious deadlines, so that you can achieve things without wasting energy just thinking about them. Because a lot of times that's what we do. So we think, we plan, but we don't execute. And execution is king. Planning doesn't get you anything, but execution gets you king. Now, granted, there has to be a little bit of planning before you execute. But what I'm saying is, don't spend your whole time planning. Start executing. And if you set yourself these fictitious deadlines, or these things that you say you have to complete by a certain time, and if you don't, then you cut it out, then it's done. That gives you some ideas about stopping points. You can prune things away by saying, hey, I'm going to give this thing a shot for X number of hours, or X amount of days, or X amount of months. And if it doesn't work out, then we're pruning it, we're cutting it out. So you can put those two together, pruning and stopping points, to really save some energy. The next one is stimuli. And with stimuli, it's, again, finite. We can only consume so much information, right? We can only have so many books that we can read, so many podcasts we can listen to, so many TV shows we can watch, so many conversations we can have. We have a finite amount of input that can come into our brains. So one of the things that I love every time I think about stimuli, I think about information coming in. I go back to Tim Ferriss when he's talking about the low information diet. And with that, what he's saying is, you don't need to consume so much. Just cut it out. And in his book, he talks about how he never checked the news or read a newspaper in like 6 years or something. And I'm not saying go to that extreme, but maybe just pay attention to what your inputs are. Are they positive or are they negative? Are they educational or are they not? Do you gain something from them or do you not? It's kind of like junk food. You know, if you're trying to eat healthy, you are what you eat. If you eat all sugar and sweets and don't even eat any protein, then you're not going to get healthy. And the same thing comes with your mind. If your mind is always consuming negative information that you cannot act on, then you're never going to grow. You're not going to build that mind up. But if you're consuming things that you can act on and information that you can learn from and you can develop and improve on, then you're consuming the correct stimuli. Another thing that I really like about stimuli, kind of puts it together when you're looking at stimuli and maybe energy. If you put those, or actually the next one, hours, it's the idea of just-in-time learning. And I heard that from Pat Flynn. He was talking about how when he's researching a new idea or something like that, he won't learn everything about it. He will learn what he needs in order to execute. So instead of just reading everything, just bookmark it and only read the things that are important for the moment. Right? I alluded to the last element of the creative rhythm, which is hours. Hours. We all know we have a finite amount of time on this earth, a finite amount of time every day. So hours is pretty easy when you think of it that way, but there's another way you can think of it. With hours, we all have a certain period of the day or a certain time where we're most effective. And what we need to do is to plan our day out so that during those times, we can be creative. That's when we need to, fire on all cylinders. When there's a new project coming up, we need to plan for those few hours of the day that are our peak hours to be creative. So for me, that's in the morning. It's between like 8 o'clock and noon. That's when I'm going to accomplish more that day than I would, between noon and 8 o'clock. Just those 4 hours, 8 to noon, is kind of like my peak time of coming up with ideas, being creative and trying to come up with solutions. So that's when I try to do all that things. And then in the afternoon, that's when I'll check email, I'll respond. I'll do the less creative tasks, the more mundane task. So one thing you can do is you can set aside time for ideas. If you look at any business leader and you ask them, how important are innovative ideas to your business growing, thriving, and being successful? And they'll all raise their hand. They'll all be excited about ideas. And I'm sure you think the same thing, that ideas are extremely important. But do you actually put time on your calendar to create ideas? Do you have a block, an hour a week even, for idea time? You really need to. So I think that's very important. And I actually set aside about 3 hours a week just for ideas. I call it leadership and training ideas. And basically what I do during that time is I will consume podcasts. I'll listen to audiobooks. I'll do something where my mind can focus. And I'll usually pull up a Word document and I'll just sit there and stare at it while these things are going on. And I'll use that time to try to come up with ideas. And a lot of times I'll grab something and I'll implement it with my team right away. Other times I won't. It just depends if it's useful or not. But a lot of brilliant ideas have come out of those idea times. Another thing you can do is setting up unnecessary creating. That's the idea of just creating things that will never be seen publicly. And sometimes those things will be seen. You can, if you accidentally create something and you're unnecessary creating that's brilliant, that's great, that's fantastic, then share it with the world. You don't want the world to miss out on what you've created. Some examples of my unnecessary creating is mobile apps. At the time, I was just a manager of a web team. We did no mobile activity, but mobile was just starting out. It was in 2009, and mobile was coming up in 2010. And we're like, we're going to get on this mobile thing. So in 2010, I just started building mobile apps, little stupid games, time-wasting games, a couple of activity or some applications that you could actually use that had utility type apps. And I never envisioned any of these going out to the public. It's more like just me playing around and kind of learning the technology behind it. And some of them have gone out, and actually one of them has about 4 million downloads now. It's probably my most successful unnecessary creating project. But the idea behind unnecessary creating is a practice. It's a muscle. If you're expected to be creative or expected to be brilliant at any given time, you have to be ready for it. You don't expect any marathon runner to go out and run a marathon unless they've trained along the way. That's why they run 3 to 5 times a week, to keep their base, to keep ready. And I did the same thing when it was time for our team to switch over and for me to take on the mobile development as well as the web development for my team. I was ready. I didn't have to go and cram for 3 or 4 days trying to figure out what is this mobile thing, how do you submit an app to the app store, What kind of signing certificates do you need? What kind of development environment do you need? How do you do unit tests? All that stuff I'd already taken care of by my unnecessary creating, and I was able to jump right in with ideas, with plans, with timelines, and I knew exactly what I was doing. And that's the beauty behind unnecessary creating. If you can spend a couple of hours a week just doing things that can get you ready, that can build those muscles of creativity, it'll save you a lot of time in the long run, and also help you be brilliant during those times. The last thing in hours is checkpoints. And the idea of checkpoints is that you need to check to see if you did the things that you were planning on doing, and what worked well for you, what didn't work well. It's kind of like a retrospective when it comes to a Scrum methodology. The idea that you say what worked well, what can we improve on, and so on and so forth. And you can set forth these checkpoints with yourself. Just put them on a calendar and have one maybe once a day, once a week, once a month, however you want to do them. I would advise at least doing it once a week, once a month, and once a quarter. The once a day thing is more an idea that I got from Pat Flynn, where he put something on his calendar that just reminds him and says, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing right now? It just pops up. And the idea behind that is you kind of see that and jogs your memory. No, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing right now. I'm working on a SQL script, but that's not the most important thing. I can give that to someone else on my team, and I can focus on something more important at a higher level. And that's the idea of checkpoints. So if you put these together, focus, relationships, energy, stimuli, and hours, it spells the word F.R.E.S.H. And it's supposed to be easy to remember. It's a little acronym. It's just focus, relationship, energy, stimuli, and hours. They're all finite things, but they're the 5 elements that help us be creative. And remember, the brilliant ideas don't come in the everyday, mundane task that you're doing, but it comes in the white spaces. They come when you step away from those tasks for a little bit. So I recommend taking a walk. We do walking meetings a lot at work where we'll just go out and walk around the lake outside. And it really makes me come up with good ideas while I'm out there. Now, I do want to read one quote from Gretchen Rubin. It says, "What you do every day matters more than what you do once in a while." And the idea behind that is it takes that everyday activity to be ready for that big moment that comes up. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something from it. And I want one more quote from Todd Henry in the Accidental Creative. I also heard this quote from F.R.E.S.H too several years ago before I read this book, and it was, cover bands don't change the world. You need to find your own unique voice. And the idea behind that is just the Beatles changed the world. They're not a cover band. Cover bands just played the same songs that you've already heard, and they're there to make money. If you want to actually change the world, you have to step out and do something unique, something different. So I hope that hits home. I hope that inspires you guys to do something different, and you understand the ideas of creative rhythms and how it's important to leaders and leadership. All right, cheers.